Hollywood's most unpredictable talk show titan just swapped his neon podcast studio for a sworn witness chair, and the revelations are louder than any episode of JRE. Joe Rogan, the man who ferries UFC brawlers and astrophysicists through 3-hour thought expeditions, now stares across a courtroom at Sean Diddy Combs, ready to recount a private showdown that could reshape both their empires. Rogan claims the hip-hop mogul dangled exclusive guests and sponsorship deals, then turned threatening when Joe refused a rumoured personal arrangement. Overnight, booking agents went silent, ad contracts vaporised, and whispered calls urged networks to drop the bald mic guy who wouldn't play along. Today, Rogan's gravel-low voice is set to chart that pressure campaign step by step, from cryptic late-night texts to back-channel phone calls promising war on your feed. The big question hovers like studio smoke. If Rogan's podcast, one of the most bulletproof brands on the internet, could be targeted for extinction over a private rejection, what chance did lesser voices ever have? And just how far would Diddy reach to keep his demands under wraps? The gavel hasn't even dropped, yet the stakes already sound bigger than any conspiracy Joe has ever debated on air. It kicked off with a midnight ring that sliced straight through Joe Rogan's Austin compound, an unlisted number flashing Los Angeles, California. On the other end, a velvet-sounding aide claimed to represent Puff's private circle, praising the podcast as the only seat big enough for the next chapter of the bad boy legend. Rogan, half amused, half curious, listened as the caller dangled a blockbuster guest list, pop icons, undefeated fighters, even a sitting senator willing to tell truths nobody else could handle. All Joe had to do, the voice hinted, was meet Diddy after hours to discuss mutual chemistry. Rogan's gut flickered red. He'd heard versions of this pitch before, offers that start with champagne and end with invisible contracts. He politely declined, citing a packed recording calendar. The vibe on the line shifted. Compliments cooled into calculation. Sean values reciprocation, the aide said, pausing just long enough for meaning to settle. Then the call dropped, leaving a hum Rogan would later describe as the quietest threat I never heard. Within a week, oddities piled up. A celeb who'd confirmed a JRE appearance ghosted without explanation. A nutrition brand sponsor quietly pulled a 6-figure renewal, citing strategic redirection. Rogan's longtime booking manager found her inbox flooded with polite but firm cancellations, each CC'd to the same mysterious LA address. At first, Rogan chalked it up to coincidence or Hollywood's fickle tide, but one email, subject line, "Next time, pick up the call," landed like a glove slap. Attached was a blurry screenshot of Joe doing stand-up in 1998, captioned, "Careful who still has tapes." That was the moment suspicion hardened into resolve. Rogan began archiving every odd message, time-stamping every dropped guest, building a quiet dossier he never intended to use, until a federal subpoena arrived on his porch, naming him a key witness in United States versus Sean Combs. But that wasn't the whole story. The real shock hit when a former label executive slid into Rogan's DMs with a tale of cancelled contracts and coded favours that stretched far beyond podcasts. And what happened next would stun even the most jaded listeners. A single late-night DM lit up Rogan's phone like a warning flare. The sender, once a senior vice president at one of Diddy's partner labels, typed only 4 words: "You're on the list." Curious, Joe called him back through an encrypted chat app. What spilled out sounded less like gossip and more like a playbook. According to the exec, Diddy kept an informal compliance ledger tracking, which media hosts granted special access, and which ones refused private demands. Reports claim a green check meant VIP booking priority, a red dash meant limit visibility. Rogan, after turning down that midnight meetup, had earned the darker mark, black circle status. In label slang, that meant suspended interviews, withheld promos, and whispered reminders that collaborations speak louder than courage. The exec forwarded screenshots of group texts, names redacted, showing talent managers agreeing to circle back on Joe when he's ready to cooperate. One message even suggested planting rumours that Rogan's show had lost its edge. The plan, the exec said, was to starve the podcast of A-list voices until numbers dipped and sponsors bailed. Rogan felt the chill in real time. A comedian friend apologized for dropping out, admitting a sudden conflict with a bad boy-backed tour. A mixed martial arts champ texted that his upcoming fight promo had to stay on network turf. None of them blamed Diddy outright. Nobody had to. The silence spoke louder than accusations, yet the blacklist had a fatal flaw. It left a digital trail. The exec saved every chat to his private cloud, scared he'd be next. Now he was willing to testify, linking Rogan's dry booking calendar to a pattern of industry squeeze. Prosecutors pounced. They subpoenaed the cloud archive the same night, but that wasn't the endgame. A deeper layer, coded favours traded at charity galas, showed how the squeeze extended beyond mere guest lists, and what surfaced next would shake Rogan's already rattled world. 3 weeks later, Rogan found himself pacing the red carpet outside a glitter-drenched veterans benefit in downtown Houston. He'd been invited months earlier to auction off a private studio tour. Now, the buzz was all about Diddy swooping in with $1 million pledge. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers flickered like camera flashes, and a jazz trio played so softly it felt like a hush rather than music. Halfway through dinner, an event coordinator slid a frosted glass badge onto Joe's table, etched with a tiny black circle, the exact symbol the label whistleblower had mentioned. Moments later, he watched Diddy glide from table to table, greeting media hosts who wore green badges. Each handshake came with a discreet card exchange, white for most, gold for a select few. Rumours suggest the card's colour matched the level of cooperation expected. When Diddy reached Rogan's table, the room temperature seemed to dip. The mogul praised Joe's work, then leaned in close enough for the cameras to miss his words. Reports claim he whispered, "Doors open when debts are paid." Before Rogan could respond, Diddy pressed a plain white card into his palm and moved on. Printed on the back was a single line, "Black marks fade with favour." The night's auction ended in record totals, but backstage, Rogan noticed something stranger. 2 corporate sponsors he'd lost weeks earlier were suddenly back, yet only if he'd reconsider a private follow-up with Sean. It felt less like generosity and more like leverage disguised as philanthropy. Rogan pocketed the badge and card for his growing evidence file. The charity gala had shown him the blacklist wasn't just digital, it was woven into public goodwill, coded into badges and traded like currency in velvet rooms. But whispers hinted at an even darker tactic, throttling Rogan's reach on streaming platforms through back-channel deals, and uncovering that scheme would push the case into uncharted territory. The first hint came as a dip so slight Rogan almost missed it. Episode downloads slid by 3%, nothing alarming for a show that routinely tops the charts. But the curve kept bending, week after week, until numbers looked like a downhill bike trail. Listeners complained they couldn't find new episodes in their up next queue. Chart trackers showed sudden data glitches that buried JRE beneath shows half its size. Behind the scenes, a former content ops analyst at a major streaming platform, codenamed Kara, reached out through an encrypted burner account. She claimed back-channel agreements let influential labels flag creators as brand sensitive, nudging discovery algorithms to reduce visibility without an outright ban. Kara forwarded an internal memo listing Rogan under a red highlighted tier marked engagement moderation, pending reconciliation. In plain English, slow his reach until he makes nice. Data backed the leak. Rogan's team tracked a spike in server-side throttling the same day Diddy's publicist tweeted a cryptic line about respecting cultural alliances. Advertisers noticed too. One wellness brand paused their campaign, citing a sudden drop in ROI that didn't match listener feedback. Rogan's revenue graph now mirrored a heartbeat under sedation. Steady blips, no peaks. Kara warned that the throttle wasn't just code, it was reinforced by human curation. Playlists once eager to feature Rogan were told to diversify talking head content. She saved chat logs of supervisors reminding staff, blacklist guidelines are executive eyes only. Those logs, now in federal hands, link the slowdown to the same LA address that sent Rogan's earliest cancellations. The revelation turned sabotage into a provable pattern. First bookings, then sponsors, now algorithms. And yet, whispers pointed to a final lever Diddy was ready to pull. An intimidation tactic involving a private investigator and a years-old comedy club incident that could smear Rogan's credibility overnight. What happened when that threat hit Rogan's doorstep would push the courtroom and public opinion into uncharted, explosive territory. One foggy Austin morning, Rogan spotted a silver sedan idling across the street, engine on, windows up. At first he shrugged. Fans sometimes parked for a glimpse of the studio, but the car reappeared for 3 straight days, always with the same stocky driver scrolling a tablet. On day 4, a plain envelope arrived in Rogan's mailbox. Inside was a single Polaroid, Joe on stage in 2003, mid-riff on an edgy joke he'd long retired. Scribbled beneath were the words, "Stories age poorly, let's keep them buried." Rogan's security team traced the sedan to a boutique firm known for reputation containment. Paperwork linked its retainer to a shell company tied to Bad Boy Entertainment. The investigators' first salvo was tame, old jokes, grainy photos, but the message was clear. More damaging material could surface if Rogan kept talking. Within a week, tabloids teased a decades-old scandal involving a late-night altercation at a comedy club. Reporters claimed unnamed sources had exclusive footage. Rogan knew the incident, a heated exchange, quickly diffused, no charges filed. Still, the timing felt weaponized. Prosecutors later obtained emails showing the PI pitching the story to outlets, sweetening the deal with backstage credentials for Diddy's next tour. Rather than flinch, Rogan hit record. On a live stream, he addressed the rumour head-on, supplying context before anyone else could spin it. Fans rallied, but the smear attempt proved a critical puzzle piece for investigators. It tied Diddy's network to intimidation strategies far beyond quiet cancellations and throttled streams. The intimidation backfired. Public sympathy swung toward Rogan. The PI's client list leaked online, and watchdog journalists traced more than a dozen story drops that coincided with Diddy's private disputes. Prosecutors folded the findings into a new racketeering count centered on coercion through media manipulation. But the most devastating evidence was still sealed, a whistleblower's sworn affidavit describing direct orders from Diddy himself. When that document finally hit the docket, even courtroom veterans felt the mood lurch. The courtroom settled into a hush so tight you could hear suit fabric shift. Prosecutors rose with a single folder marked sealed and announced they would unmask a witness known only as Project Atlas. Moments later, a sworn affidavit, 31 pages, signed under penalty of perjury, flashed on the overhead monitors. Its author? Diddy's former executive communications chief, a strategist paid to turn whispers into weapons. According to the document, Diddy personally greenlit a campaign labelled Operation Pod Fade. The goal? Choke Joe Rogan's reach until he agreed to what the mogul called an energy exchange, privacy for access. The affidavit detailed Tuesday night war rooms in a Bel Air guest house where staff mapped podcast guests like chess pieces, red stickers for anyone booked on JRE, green for those willing to sit out in solidarity. Rogan's name was circled in black ink, the words "No compliance" scrawled beside it. One passage hit like a dropkick. The strategist claimed Diddy ordered his team to find or fabricate leverage if Rogan held firm. That directive allegedly birthed the resurrected comedy club altercation, the playlist throttling, and even the charity gala card exchange. Screenshots of internal chats showed aides brainstorming phrases to leak. Ratings slump, problematic past, industry fatigue, all designed to tarnish Rogan without ever mentioning Diddy's hand. Even more explosive were instructions to approach a major streaming executive with a promise: priority access to Bad Boy's catalogue if algorithmic visibility for JRE quietly dipped. The affidavit named the exec, listed the date, and attached a calendar invite titled Content Harmony Lunch. Prosecutors promised the invite metadata would surface in cross-examination. Defense lawyers sputtered, calling the affidavit fiction penned by a disgruntled employee. But the strategist had backed claims with encrypted voice memos, still under seal, purportedly capturing Diddy's directives word for word. The judge allowed every line into evidence, citing the strategist's proximity to top-level meetings. As the document's final page burned across the screen, Rogan sat stone-faced, hands clasped, while Diddy avoided eye contact, jaw working hard behind a tight smile. Court recessed, yet the gallery buzzed with one question. If an affidavit could sketch the playbook, what would happen when those voice recordings finally echo through the chamber? The judge's gavel fell, lights dimmed, and a single speaker crackled to life. A grainy recording rolled. Diddy's unmistakable voice, low and measured. He doesn't play ball, we freeze him out. Sponsors, streams, guest flow, offer them a choice, loyalty or exile. A stunned hush hit the benches. Then another clip. Leak a little dirt. Suggest he's slipping. Fear does the heavy lifting. Every syllable sounded like velvet wrapped around brass knuckles. Jurors shifted. Reporters clutched pens. Rogan stared straight ahead, jaw set. Defense objected. Context is missing. But the judge waved it off. The strategist's affidavit had paved the lane. More tapes followed, aides discussing algorithmic chill, promising certain tracks in exchange for turning down the Rogan heat, laughing about how quietly reputations can bleed out. Across the aisle, an executive from a major streamer, subpoenaed at dawn, whispered with counsel, face drained. Prosecutors announced they'd call him next, armed with those content harmony lunch calendar logs. Gallery murmurs swelled. You could feel allegiances fray in real time. A talent agent bolted for the hallway, phone pressed tight, likely recalibrating client strategies on the fly. Diddy's team tried damage control during recess, but news alerts were already live. Secret Tapes detail campaign to throttle Rogan. Social feeds erupted, public sympathy swung hard toward the podcast host once pegged as untouchable. Sponsors that had ghosted him hours earlier tweeted cryptic eyes emojis, signalling a possible return. When court reconvened, the judge warned against outbursts, yet tension coiled like a spring. Prosecutors hinted at a final witness, a surprise name who'd tie party rituals, media pressure and money trails into one damning knot. They promised the reveal would land like a hammer and close the circle Rogan's testimony began. When the court reconvened, every eye tracked the side door. A hush rippled as the clerk announced a name no headline had braced for, Howard Jacobs, Spotify's former global licensing chief. Jacobs, stiff-backed in a grey suit, had departed the platform months earlier for personal reasons. Now his nervous smile hinted he'd carried a secret all the way from Stockholm to the witness stand. Under oath, Jacobs confirmed what the tapes implied, a back-channel dinner in Beverly Hills, where Diddy's emissaries offered an early drop of Bad Boy's remastered catalogue, plus exclusive rights to a forthcoming documentary soundtrack, if the service would rebalance discoverability away from Joe Rogan's show. Jacobs testified he'd balked, calling the pitch unethical throttling, but a higher-up overruled him, labelling Rogan a brand risk magnet after the host's refusal to collaborate socially. Defense pushed back, implying Jacobs sought revenge for a demotion. He countered by handing over a resignation email dated the next morning after that dinner, warning executives they were bribing visibility. The timestamp matched the server log pivot within 3 hours. Jurors scribbled furiously. One shook her head as if tallying each coincidence turning into intent. With Jacobs corroborating the strategist's affidavit and the tape directives, the prosecution finally had its trifecta: motive, method, and measurable impact. The judge scheduled closing arguments for the next day, cautioning counsel to be ready for a marathon of final blows. Outside, news vans lined the street while number Rogan verdict and number Diddy Gate trended worldwide. Industry insiders whispered that whichever way the jury swung, the unmasking of stealth throttling would force every major platform to audit its unseen levers. But a verdict isn't the end of a story. It's the spark that sets reputations ablaze or cements them in granite. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.